I want to take a minute and set some expectations today. The point of this discussion is not a one-time thing. Man, I'm nervous today. This is a topic that is prevalent in every industry, especially in our industry with the amount of stresses and the amount of pressures that we can face. We'll get into a lot of that stuff, but ultimately, everybody in this room is a leader. You're a colleague, you're a friend, you're an employee, you own companies, you're managers. It's up to every one of us to start to change our culture. Right? We'll talk a little bit more about that later. I want to acknowledge something for everybody. Who you see in front of you right now, the Chris Bolio that you guys see in front of you, is a persona that I have worked very, very, very hard to craft. We each have one of those. You don't see in front of you the unpopular, goofy, nerdy little kid that I used to be. You don't see in front of you, well, you see the goofy a lot. You don't see in front of you the person that doesn't always deserve to be here, right? Because there's a mask. We all have that. That's part of what makes this industry difficult. So I want to acknowledge for every one of you who says, oh, that guy has nothing to worry about. We all do. We all go through struggles and we all go through doubts. And it's normal and it's natural. And part of this is about making that acceptable to let it show once in a while or to ask for help. On Monday 28th in 2008, I woke up like any other Monday, getting ready for work in my couple-year-old business, 3 years old, and I tripped a couple of times going to the bathroom. Not a big deal, a little bit clumsy. I started brushing my teeth and I almost fell over twice. Fast forward to the end of the day, I had been to a neurologist. The neurologist called me about 9:30 p.m. and he said one of three things. He said, Chris, you may have had a stroke. Unlikely because you're 28 and in really good shape. You might have MS, which you're going to struggle with for the rest of your life, but most likely you have a brain tumor. Pretty terrifying evening. The next morning, I got in to see Dr. Grossman. Dr. Grossman was the head of neurology at Methodist Hospital. That's not a small feat. Pretty amazing man. The good news was that I had had a stroke. He was going to bet his career on it. The bad news was he had no idea why. So the next 2 weeks were filled with tests and procedures to try to figure out why in the hell a healthy 28-year-old had had a stroke. But everything was getting better. I was starting to be able to use my hand again. I was starting to walk a little bit better. I was using a cane at the time. And about 2 weeks later, August 10th of 2008, 2008 was 16 years ago, right? Well, it just passed, the Olympics. So 16 years ago, Michael Phelps was kicking butt in the Beijing Olympics. And being a swimmer, or ex-swimmer, and a triathlete, I was really, really excited. I couldn't get excited about anything. I couldn't let my blood pressure go up. I couldn't exercise, couldn't walk fast during this time because we didn't know what was going on. And that night, I watched Michael Phelps swim the 4x100 individual medley and came from behind and just kicked butt. I got excited. I yelled and screamed and cheered, gave my wife a kiss. We went to sleep. Good night, I love you. The next morning, I woke up completely paralyzed on the left. It took a year or more of grueling physical therapy to learn to walk again, to learn to type again, to learn to dress myself. And after that, I was still on a cane, I was working. I finished some homes that I was building in a wheelchair, but physically got back pretty quickly. And after that year or more, people on the street really couldn't tell that I had had a stroke. So that's pretty great. You would generally think, that's awesome. That's a great part of the story. Yay. The reality was I was winning the battle physically, but I was absolutely losing the war mentally. I couldn't drive because cars terrified me. I had to have someone drive me around the job sites. I couldn't work. I could work for 2 hours in the morning, sleep for 4 or 5 hours during the day to get some energy, work for 2 hours at night. And when my wife asked me what I wanted for dinner, I wanted to cry. I did cry, often. I was deeply, severely depressed. I'll share with you, that has been the hardest part of my life ever. I was living in the body and in the mind of a person I hated. We'll get into a little bit more about that later, but I want to focus on that piece of the depression a little bit. And the day that it started to turn around was when I went to see Dr. Dedell. I went to her home office, and I'll never forget the last thing she told me in that first meeting with her, which was, "Chris, it will be okay. It will be okay. I don't know if you'll walk again. I don't know if you'll be able to run again. I don't know how much you're going to recover physically, but I can tell you it will be okay. If it's not okay, it's not done yet." That's important to realize with depression, because sometimes you don't feel like it will be okay, right? A couple of the things that she told me, Dr. Dedell, for a little bit of context, was in a wheelchair since she was 20 or 22. She had a muscular dystrophy. And talking to her as a young man on a cane felt like I was whining, felt like I was a baby. I felt like I was weak. And Dr. Dedell shared with me very eloquently and really compassionately. She said, "Chris, your pain is valid. You think you can't talk to me because I'm in a wheelchair." She said, "I'm happier than you are. I'm in a great place. I love my life. You are in pain, but I can help you get back to where you want to be." One of the other important things that she shared with me when she brought up the subject of taking medication to help me get back, I said, "Dr. Dedell, I don't want to take medication. I don't want to be fake. I don't want to feel like I am washing over or like I have to be on drugs to function. I don't want to be a fake version of myself." And she, again, very compassionately, explained to me that getting on medication, and Paxil specifically is what I got on, was going to help me be me again. The person that I was not the real me. I was in a shadow, right? So I don't want to get too much into the details. I know we're running short on time, or we will be. Therapy and drugs saved my life. They saved my life. They saved my marriage. They saved my kids' lives, who we didn't have at the time. After more than 10 years of therapy, 16 years later, where am I today? Well, my business is running really well. I have an amazing partner. I have great team members, great partners. I love what I do. You guys know that. But that's the least of it. I am a better husband than I ever could have been. I'm a better father than I ever could have been. And I believe that I'm the best version of a human being that I've ever been. Not that it's perfect, not that it's always pretty, not that I don't lose it, not that I don't have days where I'm sad or depressed or that I'm just struggling with something. But I am the best human version of myself that I can possibly be today. Again, the ask today is that when you hear some of these stats, when you hear Caroline bring this incredible amount of knowledge, that we maintain this conversation. I'm sharing with you guys the struggle that I went through to hopefully give you context around something that we all go through at some point, or we know somebody who has.
Thank you, Chris. You know, Chris's story is not unique in the way that, just like you said, mental health touches everyone, right? And I just want to point to this quote up here. This is from Chris in the story that was mentioned earlier. But you know what's really unique about Chris is the way that he is so open about talking about this. I published this story in July 2023, so just about a year ago. But that story started in June 2022 after an NAHB meeting. A remodeler came up to us and said, I want to talk about mental health and I want to talk about personal wellness. And that never happens. That never happens when a contractor comes up to you and says something like that. So of course we said, yeah, let's talk about it. We need to talk about it. And you know, that singular conversation and that singular experience spurred dozens of conversations on the record, off the record. It's continuing the conversation today. It's what introduced me to Chris. And you know what we didn't realize at that time? Though we knew mental health is a rarity to talk about in this industry, what we did not realize was how it was actually destroying the industry right in front of us. And that is truly not an overstatement.
The quote, if you read it, if you're curious, yes, I was talking about what everybody thinks I was talking about. You never think that you're someone who is willing to end your life. But the reality is that we all are, given the right circumstances, given the right pressures and the right fears, in a really a boiler of emotions, it can cross your mind. And to be in a place where you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel is absolutely terrifying. I've spoken with several of you about personal experiences with people in the industry that decide this is it, this is as far as I can go. And it's heartbreaking. Again, we're going to continue to beat this drum. It's up to every one of us in this room to make it okay for people to ask for support, to ask for help.
Absolutely. And so as I said, what we didn't realize before we started talking to people was that mental health, poor mental health, is actually really the silent killer of the construction industry. And like I mentioned, that is not an overstatement. 49.4 men in construction die by suicide per 100,000 people. Now, that stat, you might think, oh, I don't really know what that means, but to put it in perspective for you, that is 4 times higher than the national average of 13.5. It is also higher death rate than all job site work-related fatalities combined, 5 times higher. I'm sure you don't think about mental health every day when you're on the job site. You want to keep your teams happy, healthy, But really what the silent killer is poor mental health. And that's something that we discovered when we really were having these conversations with contractors and diving into those statistics. And when you think about it, you really wonder why, right? And we'll get into that. But this quote here is from a contractor named Casey Baldovan. He's based in Peoria, Illinois. And what he says here is there's a mental health issue in America and nobody wants to talk about it. Then you put it in the construction trades and it's just tenfold. And that's because Casey knows he's a second-generation contractor. He's running teams. He knows what stigma and distrust feels like and how that can really impact people. This societal view on maybe looking down on some of the trades for not going to college. Thankfully, I've seen a lot of shift in that perspective, which is awesome. But once Casey started embedding mental health conversations and trainings into his own life, then into his company, he said it was the best decision he ever made. But he knows that being in the construction industry is difficult, and especially when it comes to the trades. So if you look here, these stats dive a little deeper into those suicide rates. 49.4 was the one we just showed you. So you'll see for roofers, 65.2. On a construction laborer, 62. And then going to tile installers, carpenters, those are all higher. And even up there, construction managers.
One of the things that I found really interesting about that is that while we as construction managers generally are about that 4x, the people who we influence, again, we are in control. The people who we influence on a day-to-day basis have higher rates than we do. We don't see into people's personal lives. We don't see what they're struggling with. We don't see the financial pressures or the personal pressures that they have. But the reality is we all have them. And as leaders in this industry, it is incumbent upon us to make a difference in our teams and in the people's lives who we touch on a day-to-day basis.
And these stats really shock people. And they shock people who have been in the industry for decades, generations, because they just didn't know. Nobody actually did have data on these statistics until 2016 when the CDC conducted the research and dove deeper into occupational groups, and we're able to see that construction is one of the leading industries of death by suicide. Now, like I mentioned, you're probably wondering why, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. All those things up there, I'm sure you relate to. But going, very high level, if we look at the demographics of the industry, it's 89% men, though women, it is a growing share and it is awesome. 89% male. And on average, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's going to be a white male aged 25 to 65. That is also the demographic with the highest rate of suicide. So there is an intersection there. But that male domination also adds to a few different things we see up there, right? Ego. Maybe that's something you think you wanted to touch on, Chris?
The ego is a huge piece, right? That's the persona that I was talking about before. We all put on this suit of armor, every one of us. And it's not just men. It's men and women. It's everybody. We put on a suit of armor. We dress up nice. We try to make our exterior look as presentable as possible. When inside, we might want to curl up into a ball and, I don't know, eat bonbons or something. I don't know. But we all go through that at some point, or at least most of us do. If you haven't, my God, I want to meet you. I really do. The economic and business instability in our industry. I mean, Mike Dishberger and I were discussing just a few minutes ago how high interest rates mean that builders specifically, are selling less homes. They're carrying more inventory at a higher cost. That means that there's less work for our associates in our industry. That means that there's less work for the sub-trade partners actually doing the work, and all of it trickles down. And so again, as leaders, we need to start to lead maybe with a little bit more compassion, be aware that we have a big impact on other people, and we can start to change the culture that isn't necessarily this machista, egocentric, I have everything put together all of the time kind of persona.
Absolutely. And just like you said, touching on those, economic instability, so many different things in the economy that can affect your business. It's hard to predict. That changes constantly. Obviously, high stress. I'm sure all of you have 12-hour days. I'm sure all of you work more than 40 hours a week, and you are working hard. And not to mention, you're building homes, you're remodeling homes. You are doing one of the most intimate things with a client, and they are going to spend the most money with you. That is a lot of weight to carry, a lot of stress there. What I love that you mentioned, Chris, was this persona that people try to put on. And I wanted to tell this story of Colt. So Colt is a 4th-generation custom builder. So if I get this right, he took over for his father, who took over for his father, who took over for his father. If I got it wrong, don't tell me. Just I got it right. So obviously a history there. He's been running a custom building business in Birmingham, Alabama. This is a real guy, by the way, for that long. In his mind, how he saw his father, how he saw his grandfather was someone who's a successful business owner. They had it all. They were strong. They're a father. They're a husband. They're involved in their community because he was involved in the HBA in Birmingham. They do it all, but he struggled to be everything at once. And you'll see this top quote's actually from Chris, and this bottom one's from Colt, where he says, guys in construction, we're supposed to have it all figured out. We're supposed to be tough and be able to handle anything that's thrown at us, which is impossible for most. And that was impossible for Colt, and it took him a really, really long time to realize that. So after some time, after his wife said, honey, I really think maybe we should look to outside resources, he started doing that. And he thought he was the only one. He thought he was going to talk to a counselor. Nobody else does this. That was a perception he had in his mind until one day, after a Birmingham HBA meeting, he's out in the parking lot. He's talking to 5 other really successful contractors, a building products manufacturer that was one of the richest men in Birmingham, ages 30 to 61. And they didn't talk about success. They didn't talk about their bottom lines. What they ended up talking about was mental health, and what they found out was every single one of those men had sought a therapist, a counselor, an outside resource, and in that moment, those stigmas, those ideas that Colt had were shattered. And that happened in 2019, and that's still something that those men hold on to as such a pivotal, transformative moment, because someone said something, and Colt knew. He wasn't the only one doing this. Joshua Dean is actually a remodeler in Birmingham, Alabama, and he was part of this group, and he wrote a column for us to go along with this story, and these were some of his words. We collectively realized that none of us had all the answers on our own. We each reached a point in our lives, and we recognized the need to seek help for our well-being, emotional stability, marriages, and children. And then he goes on to talk about how impactful that was. But because of that ego, because of those expectations, because of that stress, Colt never imagined that. But it was right in front of him, right in the HBA. Now I want to go back here and talk about something that I don't think we can ignore when we talk about mental health, and that is actually, the role of addiction and substance abuse in the industry. So if you're not aware, the construction industry is in the top 3 industries for drug abuse, for substance abuse. And that's impacted by several different things. The physical labor, as we talk about, you're working so hard, the men and women in the fields and the trades, physically working hard. I mean, even if you're not in the field, I know that you are working hard as well with that high stress. And so that comes a high chance for injury. But what also comes is we don't see, health insurance too often. We don't see people taking care of themselves. So what do? They self-medicate. And that ties into addiction. And there is an intersection with addiction and suicide. You'll see here the stats, about 20% of folks that do commit suicide have found to have opiates in their system, and another 22% had alcohol intoxication. And this is Mike. Mike is a tile setter. He lives in California, and he was introduced to meth on the job site. But when we talked to him in 2019, when we did a piece in Pro Remodeler about addiction in the industry, Mike was in recovery. So he was in recovery in 2019, and what he shared with us, this is his quote: "Sometimes it's the opioids that will numb us so we can keep going through the aches and the pains. A lot of guys hit bottom and they get clean, but others keep using until they die." Now, when we went back to visit Mike when we're writing this story, we unfortunately did find out that Mike relapsed and passed away in 2022. So it's one of those things, one of those intersections that simply can't be ignored when we have a conversation like this.
It's important to acknowledge that addiction isn't just meth, it isn't just hard drugs, but it's something that is really prevalent in our industry as well, which is alcohol. We go out and we're social, and that's all fun and games, and it's great, but oftentimes we go home alone and we have one or two or three if we've had a bad day. It's a very fragmented industry. Again, when we don't have the ability to share with each other the struggles and the weights that we're carrying around, it's easier to go home and have a couple drinks. But that affects your life, it affects your significant other, it affects your family, it affects your friends. And if we're not careful, I come from a very long line of alcoholics, if we're not careful, then it can absolutely take over our entire life. The loneliness and the stress associated with our industry is what makes addiction so prevalent.
And there was actually a study that you'll find in the story I wrote, so unfortunately I can't name it verbatim, but it did find that if a construction industry member took 2 to 3 days of non-paid time off to recover from an injury, there was a significantly higher chance that they would actually, go to self-medicating things like, alcohol, drugs, things like that. So we kind of outlined really what this is. We kind of, I hope, put it in perspective for all of you. Now, the next question I hope you're thinking is, what can I do? What can we do?
Here's the what we're going to do in this room. Go to the next one. Again, everybody in this room, it's your job to put this into place. It's your job to put this into practice and to be the leader that you can be, to lead your friends and your colleagues and your employees to normalize a conversation around mental health, just simple check-ins. And we'll give a couple of examples. This is going to kick off an initiative at the GHBA specifically, because of my passion for the subject, because of so many other people's passion for the subject coming together at once with Caroline's article and really the industry at large. NAHB is doing a ton of work on this because it's so important. And it's important that every one of us take the personal mission to go back to our teams and our companies and make the culture shift where it's no longer stigmatized to have a bad day or to be sad or to be depressed about something, where we can normalize having a conversation around, hey, how are you doing? With our teams, every week we have a quick mental health check-in. And it can be as simple as, what is your stress level from 1 to 10? But by doing that, a very simple action of normalizing that question, you're opening the door for one of your employees, maybe not in front of everybody else. Maybe one of your team members comes to you later and says, you know what, I'm really struggling. I need some help with this. I don't know what to do. I'm considering quitting, or I'm drinking a lot at home, or I'm having a lot of struggles with my kids or my significant other. But it at least opens the door for us to connect on a human level with each other, because we all experience this, and yet we think we're the only ones.
Absolutely. And there is something really to say and talk about this idea of the workplace and mental health. Because you might think mental health, these conversations, they don't belong on my job site. We're there to work. Obviously, right? Yes, we're there to be productive. We are there. But more research has come out about links between personal wellness and positive mental health and productivity and engagement. So for my piece, I actually interviewed a workplace wellness expert, and I thought she outlined some of these perspectives really, really well. But overall, the lines between personal and professional are really becoming blurred. So we spend most of our time at work. Why can't we talk about our personal lives? Why can't we talk about our personal well-being or want a place that supports that? So her name's Laura Putnam, and what she told me was that wellness in general, so kind of looking back at wellness, has been perceived as an individual pursuit that ignores all the environmental and cultural factors that play into the extent to which an individual pursues well-being. So we look at it as an individual pursuit, but you have people in your life, you have stresses in your life, all of those things impact your personal well-being. And she also told me that when people have a high level of so-called perceived organizational support, meaning that I feel my organization and my boss actually care about me, then they're more likely to engage with their work. They're more likely to have a higher level of productivity, and they're less likely to leave. So I mean, one of the things that have been facing the construction industry for so long has been a labor shortage, right? So this is right there with that conversation of hiring, retention, productivity, engagement. Mental health has a place in that. And then if you look here, this kind of dives a little bit more into the wellness in the workplace, but it looks, interestingly, these are stats from Deloitte, it looks at the C-suite. So if you can't really read it, it says employees and executives put a high premium on having a job that supports their well-being. Pretty much everyone does. And then if you look here, around 1 in 3 employees and executives are constantly struggling with fatigue and poor mental health.
One of the things that I found super interesting about this was it's the C-suites. It's the people who have the biggest suit of armor. It's the people who pretend to be okay the most. And they understand the stresses. They understand that it's really, really difficult to be in a healthy environment as well. And they put a massive premium on it. That's a ton of us. We're a C-suite, right? We don't think of it that way, but a lot of us are. A lot of us, most of us in this room are leaders in our companies. We tend to think that the grass is greener. That's kind of something we say a lot when an employee goes from one to another company. The grass isn't always greener, and that's the same thing here. You look up at somebody in the industry, you look up at your mentor, you look up at your coach, you look up at the leaders in the room who've stood up, and you think that they have it put together more than you do. They don't. We're all just humans trying to get through this together. So let's get through it together.
Absolutely. All right, so going back, what can we do? What can we do actually actionable? So I want to share with you a few different things. You can see what works for you. You can do what you feel. But if you haven't picked up on it, I told a few stories, and a lot of those stories came from one person saying something. One person said something to their colleagues, Chris shared something with me, and that made a ripple effect. So my piece was called You Need to Talk About It. And I bolded it because nobody wants to say the word, right? Mental health. But really, that is the biggest thing you can do, is talking about it. But, yeah, go ahead.
No, good.
I was going to dive into this. So.
We're going to share with you a QR code. The GHBA has put together a fantastic landing page for a ton of resources, anything from crisis intervention to very simple tools that you can use with your teams, with your colleagues, with your employees, with your friends, to help them along this journey as well.
Absolutely. And I'll share a few things that real contractors out there do and really enjoy. So I mentioned Casey Baldovan. What he does is bi-weekly training sessions, 45 minutes long. They're on soft skills, but every single one has an angle on mental health. So there's emotional intelligence, leadership, communication. And those are bi-weekly, 45 minutes. Few weeks after, he does check-ins. Hey guys, how did you use what you learned that other day? Maybe in your personal life, maybe in the workplace. Let's share, let's talk about it. Steve Barkhouse from Amstead Design Build up in Canada, he took it he kind of blew it up, right? He did a full workshop day around mental health. And what he did that worked really well for him is he did an outside venue. It was mandatory for everybody. And so that kind of got people a little bit out of their physical element, a change of scenery. And the workshop came with some principal resources. The team actually created a video of their employees talking about the impact of their job and the stresses of their job and their mental health. Played that to open to everyone to really start the day. And they talked about it, and that really opened the conversation for them. Additionally, Toolbox Talks, as Chris mentioned, will show a QR code. We'll have a lot of resources with a ton of downloadables that you can go put on your job sites, just read through, help you get started. Brandon Bryant from formerly Red Tree, but he's now in a Alair location. He does a mental health and wellness program that features a monthly newsletter, and it'll talk about different things like anger management, depression, communication, difficult conversations, and he sends it out to employees, trade partners, and those he partners with in the community. And this newsletter focuses on one topic every single time. It includes resources, videos, and different tools for mindfulness, meditation, things like that. Brandon and Joshua Dean, who I mentioned, also began implementing unlimited PTO, obviously monitored. But what Joshua found is people are less likely to actually take PTO off when it's unlimited, but they might be a little bit more likely to take that day at home that they need that's not a sick day, mental health day, we might call it. And then additionally, Chris, you mentioned this, touch points, one-on-one touch points, or maybe you want to have a weekly or bi-weekly non-work related team meeting where you're just talking to your team. You're saying, what's going on in your life? Let's just chat about that. Let's put work aside for now. And Evelyn, who is also part of Alair Homes, told me it creates a more human dynamic. It just allows the team to get to know each other more personally and makes them more human, right? And then something suggested by Laura, the workplace wellness expert, was maybe you can even just start a meeting and ask, what were the 3 standout positive things that you experienced this week? Whether you share it with the group or maybe to the person next to you. And she points to research showing simple exercises just like that one can literally rewire our brains to become more optimistic and thus more resilient in the face of stress. And that is such a small thing. It just takes a few minutes. And obviously, outside resources.
So here's that QR code. Take a picture of it. This is going to be on the GHBA's website. It's a link to a lot of other amazing resources. Suicide and crisis lifelines, occupational safety and health administration, which I know we all love OSHA. Safe Building Alliance, Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention. The point is that when we start to create cohesive teams that are having fun together, are supporting each other, are talking to each other on a human level, we start to create these bonds of communication and these bonds that we don't always see but we can feel of support. And creating a culture in the GHBA in Houston, in this amazing marketplace, in this amazing city, the biggest small town there is. Changing the culture here will have, I believe, a massive ripple effect. And that's the hope. It's up to all of us in this room to continue this conversation.
And as NAHB members nationally, they have a ton of resources out right now. So NAHB.org/mental health, you'll gain a lot as well, and obviously the ones from the GHBA. So that's it from us. You obviously all know how to reach Chris, I hope. If not, his information's up there. If you'd like to connect with me, this is my digital business card up there, and I have my email. Would love to hear from you. Would love to continue this conversation. But Chris, ultimately, thank you, and thank you all for coming and listening to such an important topic.
Thank you, Caroline. thank you all so much. This wouldn't have happened without Caroline, so thank you to Caroline again. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Sonora. Sonora, you really? Okay.
Not a question.
Oh.
Speaking about a mental health day, I actually took 5 years of therapy, and I got so close to my therapist that I made her come to my wedding. But anyway, they don't do that.
Lines, the lines.
So anyway, a mental health day, think about this. You have an employee, and they really need a day off. They're stressed. You don't know. They need a day off because of mental, right? But they don't have a mental health day, and they can't afford to not be without pay. So what that forces the person to do is have to now lie. They have to come up with a reason that they can call their manager and say, and so let's just say, I'm sick of my stomach or whatever, and the next day I go, no. So now I've got that added on, I'm already stressed that I had to lie about something. Then the next day I go in and Chris, my manager, says, so how are you feeling? Oh yeah, I'm not real good, but I'm getting better. That mental day actually made that taking that day off actually was worse for that employee than if they had come to work. Because now they've had to come up with a lie, now they're lying to their boss. So I think mental health days are absolutely, actually, I think if you use mental health days, you'll find they'll use those more than they will use sick days.
Thanks, Sonora. Any other questions for Caroline or for me? And of course, we can continue this conversation. We don't have a ton of time for Q&A.
Has there been any research on the depersonalizing effects of technology in our industry? I've noticed that's a huge problem.
Oh, buddy, there's been so much research on how depersonalizing has affected us. I mean, being on these things instead of face-to-face. I am certainly not qualified to speak on that well, but I think that's a big piece of it, Dave.
What was the question?
Research depersonalizing interaction because of technology.
And that's a great point and a great question too, because you all know your work is so intimate, it's so human, it's so connected with these people, and there are so many tech solutions out there that really kind of cut a lot of that humanness out of it. So that is something to think about.
First of all, Chris, thank you for sharing that. For how maybe you can answer us, anyone can answer. What if you have an employee who comes to you with an addiction problem?
Yeah, that's a huge one, right? What he asked was, what if you have an employee who comes to you with an addiction problem? So what do we do? In today's day and age where we are carrying the liability of that employee being addicted to a substance and potentially on the job and harming themselves or someone else, there's a real consideration for what to do next. I think the first thing we need to do is remember that we are human at the core of it, and getting that person on a trajectory where they have the tools to help themselves, because we can't fix it for them. You can't fix an addict by being codependent. It doesn't work. I think there's a small organization called AA that teaches that. But acknowledging it and letting them know, hey, let's find you some resources. And then putting together a plan of action for them as an employee, just like we would correcting a normal behavior, to create a process for them to either get better and be able to be in your organization or not. But at the end of the day, they do have to do the work. That's the hard part. It's not acknowledging mental health is not a carte blanche to say, oh, hey, bring it all and you don't really have to perform. We are in business to be in business. So it's balancing the human part.
Right. And I just want to say, if someone did come up to you and tell you that, that is a reflection on them knowing they can talk to you about that.
That's right.
And that's incredible.
Yeah.
What if you have an employee that you know should be coming up to you and asking you about that? You've done everything you can to give them a platform to do so. And you can't get that conversation going.
Again,
It's really good.
as humans, as adults, we have to take responsibility for our world. I think as a boss or a leader, having a candid conversation to say, I know you're struggling with something. I can see it. I've had experience with this, but I can't help you unless you're willing to help yourself and unless you're willing to share with me. You don't have to, but I want you to know that the door is open. It's no longer you waiting for them to come to you. You have opened the door, you've kicked it open for them, and it's up to them to walk through it.
That's great.
Yes, Chastity.
I have a little personal story. My son is an HVAC in the industry, and he had a huge, crazy fear of flying. And he worked for a company, and he was in outside sales with the HVAC company. He had to go to his first out-of-town experience. We've all been through it because he was afraid of flying. His buddy gave him the Xanax that he worked with. That Xanax turned into 12 Xanax a day. He got a crazy addiction. He lost his marriage. He lost seeing his child all the time. Anyway, his company sent him to rehab once. I sent him to rehab twice. But that company still opens the doors. It's a huge thing. So can we pray still on the way?
Give them grace.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks, Chastity. Okay, guys. Woo, thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, Jack's got it.